So let's take a look here at Genesis chapter 8. And I'll begin with just a summary of this bigger picture, this cosmic picture that we're being given in the flood that we talked about a lot last week. So we don't need to really run through it too extensively, but you might have some feedback though, Minister Joe, because now you've had a week to think about it.
Yeah, there we go.
But the flood there's a historical event that is the flood. And then there is the flood and what it means for humanity and for God and for creation and all of that. And the two are obviously related. You can't have the meaning without the historical event. But the historical event's importance is its meaning. And so we talked about this a little bit last week, but when God first created, he separated the waters above from the waters below, created a dome, and in the midst of that dome, he named that space sky, which is in Hebrew, Shemayim. And that is the space in which we live and move. And then he raises up a platform on day 3 for life into the Shemayim, and that's where he creates land-based life, right? So that's thinking very anthropocentrically, human-centered. That's the important story. Now, of course, if you're a fish, that's not the most important story, but we're human, so it's important. And what he ends up doing in the flood is he works creation back. He ends up bringing the waters back over the land, which was the work of creation on day 3. He sort of erases day 3. And that's why it's very important for Genesis to say that the water covered all the mountaintops. There can be no dry land remaining. And we end up essentially back on day 2, where the waters above have been separated from the waters below. There's a dome and there's the sky, the Shemayim, but there is no land. And all we have in there is this ark that's floating in the midst of the waters, and God is protecting them. So God has kind of brought humanity back in time. And then the waters begin to recede, and that's what we get to in chapter 8. And eventually the tops of the mountains are shown, and then it recedes further. And we're back now on day 3 of creation. They're still in the boat, but dry ground is appearing and vegetation is beginning to grow. And eventually they will settle on Mount Ararat. And Noah, through the course of time, sends out several different birds to dictate whether the earth is suitable for habitation again, whether it is sufficiently able to sustain their lives. And that gives us a little indication of the miracle of the ark. Because if they had enough food to sustain them on the ark, if that's what it was about, was food and reserves, why would they worry about getting out of the ark? Of course, just get out of it. You have plenty of food on the ark. You can keep eating that for a while you're encamped. But there's something miraculous about being on the ark. There's something in the story that once they leave the ark, the earth has to be able to sustain them. So they have to stay in there until plants and other things are available to them. And that's what the birds show them. Mm-hmm. And then the Lord leads them out. And then they begin to repopulate the earth. We're suddenly back on day 6. So I had said last week that he was working back all of creation. That probably is not the right way to say it. He's eliminating day 3 from creation is what he's doing. He's just, that day is gone. So it's really probably just the one day. And then he brings life back. So that's the cosmic picture of the flood. That's what's happening according to the metaphysics of creation. Now, it's a real historical event, but it has cosmic dimension. And that's why the story is told the way that it is. And why it's remembered the way that it is. We never want to get into a situation where we say that this is a myth. It's not a myth. It's history. But it's history told in such a way that we will understand its meaning. And that's what we have in the flood story. So as we enter into chapter 8, we're going to see people can open their Bibles. I won't show my screen for this. But you can see that chapter 8 is a chapter in which God remembers Noah and the waters begin to abate. And it's just a process of almost prayer where Noah has to look for signs that he's able to leave the ark, that the earth is now ready for them. And he does that, interestingly, with birds. And that is interesting. I've always been curious, maybe more so now than I ever have been, why he didn't just ask God when it was time to get out, why he does these birds, why he does this fleecing. Do you have any response to that, Minister Joe?
Well, I've often wondered about the significance of the type of birds, and obviously the dove it's kind of a universal peace sign now.
Right.
The dove with an olive branch in its mouth, but the first one was a raven, which is obviously a bigger bird, and probably more of a scavenger type bird.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And ravens are unclean. Yeah. So there were fewer of those. So it's interesting he releases the raven.
Yeah, and they're also scavengers. So sure there were quite a few dead bodies floating around.
Yeah. So just to talk about the raven, since you brought it up, it's interesting that before the land is suitable for humans and for the land-based animals to come out, when the raven's out there and he stays out there, or she, I don't know if it was a male or female raven, we're on day 4, where there's birds in the sky and fish in the sea, but nothing on the land. It's interesting how coming back does process through creation. Mm-hmm. So at the very least, you have a raven with no dry land yet, but it presumably living off of corpses.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because physically, after a body doesn't float forever.
Right.
So, at least on the top of the water. So I don't know. It's pretty gross.
Yeah, because you do have a few. The tops of the mountains have appeared, so it's possible that some things had settled there, and it was able to survive.
Yeah, it's probably one of those kind of gruesome movies probably that had been out. But
yeah, you wonder, why did he choose a raven? It's a very interesting question. I'm sure the rabbis have gone back and forth over it. But I don't have a good response. It seems to me a poor choice if you want to dictate whether or not the earth is suitable for the human life. But it may be a good choice if you want to see how much decay there is. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering what Noah is actually testing. Mm-hmm. The raven never comes back, which has got to tell him there's a lot of dead stuff, right? Because that's what they eat.
Right.
So I'm wondering what he was testing.
Or it didn't survive.
But of course, the text tells us it did survive. Right? Or at least it seems to imply that. You think I'm overreading that? This is in verse 6 of chapter 8. He sent out a raven and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like it survived.
Yeah.
If it didn't, I don't know by what logic we have ravens anymore, since the other one was in the ark. There were only 2 of these. They're unclean.
Right.
He had plenty of doves to spare, because they were getting seven of those.
Yeah, there's sacrifice later, yeah.
But then he sends out the dove, and the dove can't find any place to settle. That's the point. It's not as though it couldn't find any place to land, but it couldn't find any place to settle. And a dove is going to need life to be returning, at least plant-based life to be returning, right? It's going to need something to eat that's related to sustenance on earth. So it couldn't. And then he waits another 7 days, and he sends the dove out, and the dove comes back, and it has an olive leaf. Mm-hmm. So the olive leaf is significant, right? Because that's a fruit-bearing plant. So, if it had been like a maple leaf or an evergreen branch, that might not have been as encouraging.
You don't think there's any significance of the olive leaf in reference to Israel?
It comes to have meaning. I don't know if the meaning existed at this point or if the meaning that comes later is derived from this. But yeah, Israel is seen as the olive tree of God. That comes into Romans as a significant example. And of course, olive's very important to the Middle East, and olive oil. So it does become very significant. And probably a good indication as to where Ararat is. I mean, we obviously have a mountain called Ararat, but this is a long time ago. Names can change.
Yeah.
I grew up in a town called Uxbridge, Massachusetts, but it was named after a town in England. So there's an Uxbridge, England. So just that it has the same name doesn't mean we're looking at the same location necessarily, but it does seem to be in the Middle East, maybe because of the olive connection. I don't know where else olives grow, but they're very significant, it seems, in the scriptures. So could be that. And then he waits another 7 days. So he's always waiting in these weekly time periods, which is significant. It keeps calling us back to creation anyway. And he sends out another dove, and that one doesn't come back. So this seems to be the way that he realizes it's time, but none of that gets him out of the ark. Right? He does all the stuff with the birds, but none of that gets him out of the ark. It's actually God who tells him when to leave. So what do you think the birds are?
Well, I mean, it's like Hitchcock or anyone. The birds are the I think representative of kind of our desire to know, that to have the knowledge. I mean,
I think it's impatience.
Yeah, bounces back to the tree.
Yeah, and I do this all the time. I don't know if you do. If you know something's coming, or you're looking forward to something, or somebody's told you that, I don't know, you're going to get a surprise or this or that, constantly trying to figure out when. Like, well, when is that going to happen? It'll be a surprise. Yeah, but like a week, a day, an hour, and I feel like there's a little impatience in Noah. I feel like they've been on this ark for a long time. I mean, it's just about a year when all is said and done, like a little less than that. And, he's trying to figure it out. But I wonder if he needed to send out the birds. He was not commanded to. You notice that in the story? He wasn't commanded to send them out.
Say that, no.
He just does it. And the waters are dried up. Do you like this? This is verse 13. 601st year, in the first month. This is Noah's 601st year. On the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and saw that the face of the ground was drying. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, that's almost the end of the second month. There are 28 days, right? These are lunar months. So he's almost 3 months. The earth was dry. And that's when God tells him to come out. So he sends out the birds. I mean, this is a period of time. Sends out the birds, finds out things are okay. He takes off the covering and sees everything's dry. Do you have a sense, Minister Joe? This is a little pop quiz of why he can't get out until God lets him out.
Because God closed them in.
Because God shut the door. Like, he can't get out.
Right. Sounds a little bit like COVID.
That's right. Yeah, so he ends up waiting almost 2 full months after he sees the ground is dry before God will let him out of the ark. That's a long time. It's a long time.
It is.
Until you just said that, though, I hadn't thought of us being in arks right now with COVID-19. But we haven't been in this nearly as long as Noah. And we're already losing our minds.
How many birds have we sent out?
We've sent a lot of birds out.
A couple of
Haven't
red
we?
herrings.
Yeah. Every time we watch TV, we wonder what's going to happen to the protesters.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how much patience this really required on Noah's part, because there wasn't a lot he could do except wait.
I know. His wife was probably saying, when are we getting out of here?
Yeah.
And his kids
Yeah, I
are,
wonder if he had to hold off his family. They're like, send out another bird. He's like, oh, we'll wait a week.
wait a week, yeah. About 7 more days.
Yeah.
Well, 27 more days.
Takes off the cover. Maybe we can hack through the walls. No, God will open the door.
Because we got no door handle.
No way out of this thing. And again, the indication is the ark is protection and God is protecting them. So there's really, they're at God's mercy when they're going to come in and out of it. Finally, in verse 15, God tells them to go out. And this is worth sharing the screen for, because God has a number of words for Noah throughout this passage, and they're all very important, I think. But here it is. Then God said to Noah, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that's with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply. So Noah went out with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and every animal and every creeping thing and every bird and everything that moves on the earth went out of the ark by families. So we'll stop that for now. I think we're back on day 6 now. And God is giving a command to Noah similar to what he had said at the beginning. Fill the earth and subdue it. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. That's the command he gave to the first humans. He seems to be reiterating that here for Noah. Whatever you think of the flood, you cannot deny that God is working back and then re-beginning creation from Genesis 1. The illusions are too deliberately drawn.
Yeah.
So, it is historical, but you should not fail to recognize that metaphysical cosmic dimension of what's happening.
But on the same token, we're not that some people would say this is like almost like a reincarnation. It's not that representation, but we could say it's in some ways a recycling or if we look at history as a circle or a spiral, because we see similar things happening, like with Adam and Eve, how they made a decision of disobedience, and then Cain making a similar. So if you follow that route, then maybe it could be paused.
Yeah, it's not a complete renewal. He's going to admit that in just a few verses, that still every inclination of the human heart is only evil all the time. So we're not back in Eden. We're not working back to an innocent humanity that hasn't yet fallen. The ramifications of the fall continue even after this. So you're right to point out this is not like a reboot, because the bad code is still here. You know what I mean? But he has more winnowed down, like he has cut back the number of animals and people on the earth, and has started again with a single family, and has given them a repeated command, the same one he gave to Adam. But there's something different about this command to fill the earth and to subdue it, because humans are evil. Even Noah. There's some theology going here. I'll have you respond to this in a moment. I'm going to share my screen so we can read it. Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Now, we had said in a previous week that there's no indication in the text he knew the difference between clean and unclean. So why would he be sacrificing clean animals? Why not sacrifice unclean? Well, he doesn't have to know the distinction for this to work, because obviously he knew he had more of these animals. So he just sacrificed the one that he had more of. If he had sacrificed an unclean animal, he would have made it extinct. So, of course, he's not going to do that. So he doesn't, even though this might look like he has a really robust understanding of appropriate sacrifices, it also could just be utilitarian. I want to make a sacrifice to God. I'm going to sacrifice animals that I have some to spare. And the clean ones he had some to spare. So God forces him into obedience without having to give him the law. That's the point. He's sort of forced to obey, because what other choice does he have? So he makes the burnt offerings. When the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, a very recurrent phrase about sacrifices throughout the Torah, but a very strange one, since God doesn't have a nose. When God smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, and this is the key verse, I'll never again curse the ground because of humankind. For the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Nor will I ever destroy every living creature as I have done. So, as you said, we're clearly not, this isn't a reincarnation of original creation because humans are evil.
Right.
But
So,
notice the specific covenant. I will never again curse the ground. What does that refer to?
destroy it, right? Oh, the curse is the actual from Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. Yeah. They ate of the tree and God cursed the ground. That's the curse. The only one that's ever been called a curse of the ground. So he's not going to do that again. It means he's not going to punish creation for human sin again. Right? He's not going to curse it. So the world is as hard as it will get. I think that's more or less what he's saying. He's not going to make it better either. Yeah. And then the other one is that he will never destroy every living creature as I've done. So it's not exactly a promise of no floods, little f, of no death, but he won't do it to everything. It won't be global.
Yeah. And when later on, more recently, when in the reading in Genesis, Abraham uses the basis to argue about preserving or saving Sodom. That's what I read this morning
it's a really important connection. Yeah, because now, of course, we don't believe in the flood. He wiped away the innocent with the wicked. I mean, the indication of the story is that Noah was the only one still walking with God. But there were certainly a lot of innocent animals that died. So what do you make of the Lord smelt the aroma of these burning animals? It's a recurrent theme. It goes all the way through the sacrificial system of Israel. There are some Near Eastern parallels to this in other cultures where the gods feed off of the sacrifices that humans make for them, that this is food for them, and without the sacrifices they can't live. You don't get any sense of that in Genesis at all. But it does have this sense that God, how do you hear it, the pleasing aroma? I have an idea of what I hear, but I don't know I'm right about it. So it's not a pop quiz. I'm very genuinely curious what you hear.
Well, I've worked in places where there have been dead people and animals and such. So I know what the smell of death is like. But something being sacrificed, to me, a pleasing aroma is a nice smell of a steak being cooked on the grill. Now for God, we're obviously, you don't care about cooking anything on the grill as much as I do, but this is more of a just experiential type of answer. So hopefully this is okay.
Yeah.
But I think God is more pleased by the sacrifice, the process of sacrifice, the actual life being given, the effort to do what pleases Him, or what we think pleases Him. So the pleasing aroma is the actual. I mean, because to smell an animal burning, I mean, I think things I don't really want to think about, like Germany, 12,000 people being exterminated a day, and this stench of death. That's the stench of death. That's not a pleasing aroma to God.
No. Yeah, we find that out. If we had any doubt about that, we find it out in the law of Moses when he absolutely prohibits the people from ever sacrificing a human to him.
Yeah. So the smell of combined with the knowledge of of what God is. I mean, they try to do that obviously in worship and more liturgical services where they have incense.
Incense,
It reminds that it's the idea of the presence of God. But the smell, I think it's a way to express for us more for God the senses that we have, the touch. I mean, John talks about in First John about that which we have touched, that which we've held, the touch, and then to see with our eyes, to hear with our ears, and to smell, and to some degree smell it. I mean, smelling, you can often taste something when you smell it. It's not necessarily always a good sensation.
Yeah, we can easily identify, right? I mean, the smell of something cooking on a fire that is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a pleasant smell. I think, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
I love the smell of a campfire. I love the smell of a barbecue. So we can identify with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what you're wrestling with is, and what I am too, is why is it pleasing to God, this particular thing? I see what you think of this. I think that sacrifices are prayers. Now, I'm not saying that they're metaphors. Like, I think sacrifices really did happen. God really did require them. But they're prayers. You can even see this in the sacrifice of Jesus for us on the cross, that while he's dying, he prays. He's praying. And we're told in the book of Revelation that God keeps the prayers of the saints as a bowl of incense in his throne room. So this idea of the odor, I think what's pleasing to God here, the smell, is what can be pleasing in the right kind of prayer. It's Noah is turning to God and trying to communicate with him. And I think that's what he finds pleasing. Because remember, we talked about this in previous weeks at the end of chapter 4, when it says in the days of Enosh, people began to call on the name of the Lord. And then we talked about the emphasis in Noah's family line on walking with God, and Noah's righteousness being sourced in the fact that he walked with God. Well, here now, the only human family to have survived the flood, their first act is to seek God. And I think that's pleasing to the Lord. So pleasing, in fact, that he makes a covenant he's not made before. That he's not going to curse the ground, which he did with Adam and Eve. And he's not going to destroy all life as he had just done. But he's going to behave differently with humans going forward than he has in the past. That's a significant moment. And I know we don't want to, our theology requires us to defend God's immutability and realize we have to say this, right? To be orthodox, he always planned this. This is not a response to what Noah did. This is part of the divine plan of God. We'll say that to be orthodox. And I believe that. That's fine. But as we read the story, it sounds, the way it's told to us, is that God is pleased with Noah making the sacrifice and turning his family towards God. And as a response, God makes the covenant that he does with Noah. That's how it reads to me.
Yeah. If you put it up against the backdrop of the birds, it shows that the silence of God in the face of that.
Yeah, I suspect the birds were prayers too. Like I often think that when we put out fleeces, we're asking God to respond. And so we do it in however we know how. And Noah has very few ways of forcing God's hand to talk with it. He only has what was ever in his toolkit before. And he tries to send out the birds to see, and then he makes a sacrifice. These are the ways he knows to communicate with God. Remember, God has not yet promised humanity that if they pray to him, he'll come near. That he's going to promise that to the Israelites at Sinai. So at this point, if humanity is as in the days of Enosh, seeking God again, they can only cry out, right? That's what Enosh does. They call on the name of the Lord. And that's what Noah's doing. We do that in prayer. We call on the name of the Lord. And it pleases him, and it's a fragrant odor. That's the incense stuff. I've always wondered, I don't know if I've always wondered, maybe I wonder more now than I used to, whether we've mistaken the incense in Catholic worship, whether it should not be about the presence of God, but about the prayers of the saints.
Could be.
But anyway,
Also an odor though kind of lingers.
yeah.
That sort of like when mom or people in the past have cooked cabbage in the house.
Oh yeah,
It fills the whole house. You don't get rid of that too. Or fish. Put fish in the house.
fish, onions. I remember I used to like, as a young person, calf's liver. And my grandmother had a great recipe for it, and I loved it. She would make it once a year or so, not very frequently. And when Jen and I first got married, I thought I would try my hand at calf's liver. And unfortunately, Jen got a migraine. And when she gets a migraine, she gets very nauseous a lot of the time.
Mhm.
And so she ended up developing the migraine while I was cooking it. And that smell, I don't know if you've cooked liver in the house, is very, very strong. And she has so now associated that smell with how sick she was that day that I've never again made it. But in my defense, it came out great.
Mhm.
But I don't eat liver anymore because of a deeper commitment to the scriptures and the eating of organs and things like that. I don't do that anymore. But I used to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah. But that is a terrible smell. I realize now why my grandmother only ever did it once a year. It had to have been the smell.
Took a year to get rid of the smell.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it did take a whole year to get rid of it. It's certainly a year before she was willing to stomach it again. It's a rough smell, and her recipe was pan frying it. So it really got the odor in there. Yeah. So anyway.
Some things are made to be outdoors.
Yeah. But I think what was pleasing about this and what it means that the sacrifices have a pleasing odor to the Lord, I think it's the fact that humans are calling on him, that they're crying out to him. I still think that's pleasing to him. Even when the wicked do it, you see it like in the story of Jonah. God, he is merciful. He is very merciful. Here's the rest of that covenant, and I'll give you a chance to respond to it. I'll never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. And remember, the word evil in Hebrew is more like destructive.
Mm-hmm.
Nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease. So there's more to this, but we'll stop there. What do you make of that?
It seems to me that the inclination of it is that because there hasn't been the resolution of the change, it's the elimination of the amount of people, and basically the whole line of Cain is gone, and that implies the life, the lifestyles or the directions, the ambitions that were complete, really just dealt with in a judgment style. But the reality, I think more importantly, like in our society, I think more recently, I tended to want to think that people are basically good people, and the Lord has had to show that to me, because oftentimes I've thought that mostly people are evil and or have bad intentions,
Yeah.
and yet in some ways it's kind of a struggle that I've been dealing with, and more recently I tend to feel like people have the capacity to be extremely evil. I mean, the riots, the protesters, it is a fine line between protesting and then
Right, because protesting is perfectly legitimate form of public speech in the United States, but rioting is a different thing.
Yeah, and it's like can become so close. I mean, you have protesting, and then you have people who, a town wins the Super Bowl, and they go crazy, and the inclination is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
A man, it can be moved so easily toward evil, and but the last part, the verse 22, more along the line, uh, drives me to think that God's not going to change the natural rhythms of creation,
Right.
as a result of a result of our disobedience.
He will not abandon us. And that is so important because, like, we've been talking somewhat in these discussions about deism, about the idea that some people carry, that God kind of kicks things into gear and gets things rolling, and then he steps aside and lets it run its course. But that's not Hebrew theology. God is actively sustaining creation. And if he really withdrew the way deism says he did, we would all be dead, because everything would fall apart. So I agree with you. His covenant is that he will continue to sustain the earth. He is not going to withdraw. He's making a covenant to remain. That's because, let's face it, the destruction that just happened is because he withdrew some of his protection. He didn't cause the flood so much as he allowed it. And I know that that's just splitting hairs, but they're very important hairs to split. The natural state of the universe is destruction and lifelessness. So if God removes his word or his spirit, things will go back to the way they are without him. The waters rush in. So he has promised to remain. There could be no more significant promise, in my view, in all of Scripture than this one. He has promised to stick with us. He's not going to abandon us again. That is a deeply powerful promise, even though he knows what we're made of. It's not an ignorant promise on God's part where he thinks, oh, good, Noah's got this squared away. Things are going to get better. He admits it right in those verses that humans are inherently destructive. Now, we're not saying evil. That's what you were wrestling with, right? Like, we think of evil as a category, like the Joker, versus Batman, or Hitler versus Churchill, or whatever, FDR. I don't want to force anybody to think those were good characters, but that's kind of the way that we have positioned things.
Yep.
But it's not so much like evil is way more complicated than that. Humans are inherently selfish and inherently destructive, meaning do you remember the old Warner Brothers cartoon with the girl who would always hug things to death? I'm going to love you and kiss you and squeeze you and call you George. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one that was.
Yeah, I can't remember her name, but she would just squeeze things to death. That's kind of humans. Like, we are destructive. It's not like we intend to destroy, but our instincts all run that way from the time we're children. It makes me think of the phrase, that's why we can't have nice things.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're always wrecking everything. Either we love something too much. No. We love things too much and we suffocate them, or we fear losing them, so we fight and end up breaking them in the process. Reminds me of a Seinfeld where they're fighting over this porcelain thing and then they drop it. Like that's what we are. And I think that's what he's saying here. I don't think that this is like humans are purely malevolent creatures. They're always trying to tear the wings off of flies and watch everything squirm. Like, it's not like that. It's that from the time we're young, we don't know how to handle anything appropriately. Like, we are just inherently destructive, inherently ignorant, and God decides, from here on, I'm not going to do what I did in the past. I'm going to stick with you. And the whole process after this point is more like a father raising children, and more than it is like two equals. And you might say, well, God, we're never God's equal. That's true. But he seems to have treated Adam and Eve with an expectation of much greater maturity than he is going to treat Abraham. So something is changing. I know you can respond to some of that, but you launched that with this idea that he's promising to sustain creation. That's exactly what this is. Don't over literalize it and think, but this means the earth is going to survive until the sun goes red giant. Something like that. Don't materialize it. He's promising to be here with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess what I was thinking is like the capacity of man hasn't changed with in regards to eating the fruit. The fruit goes on, the knowledge of good and evil.
That's right.
And so it that's more along the lines that I see. We pass it as opposed to eating the fruit. Like we're not eating the fruit today, whether it be some type of apple. It's already in our DNA.
Right.
That we have. That's what I mean by capacity.
Well, it's in the earth. Let me put it this way. It's in the earth. Mm-hmm. Like the knowledge that we would seek can be reverse engineered through creation. So it's still in the earth. And if destructive people chase knowledge that they are not ready to have, bad things are going to happen. And that capacity is still here. Mm-hmm. Our thirst for knowledge is still here. The same thing that led Eve to find that fruit desirable is still here. And our access to the tree of knowledge is still here because creation is here. And this is what we do every day in science. We do experiments to figure out how things work. That's the tree of knowledge. That's what it is. Knowledge is not bad, but pursuing knowledge beyond our character is very, very dangerous. And of course, God has told us what our character is. We don't know what to do with what we have. We are destructive. This is the evil that's in us. And yet God has promised to remain. And he's done more than that. And I think this next part is important as well. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. So we're right back on day 6 of creation. If it wasn't implied earlier, it's explicitly stated here. But there's something different. Because in Genesis 1, we were to have dominion over the creatures of the sea and the birds of the air, over everything that crawls along the ground, right? That was the specific thing. But verse 2 here is different. It says, the fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air and on everything that creeps on the ground and on all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. So there's some sort of a disruption of this relationship where we had dominion before. Now we will have the upper hand over them, but they will fear us. It sounds a little bit like the disruption of the male-female relationship that God placed on Adam and Eve after the fall. So that's interesting. He's not cursing the land, the ground, but he is cursing the relationship between humans and animals. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. This is a first. We were given the fruit of the garden to eat. Now we're given these animals. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But there are rules. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood, so no raw. You have to cook them. This is going to require sacrifices going forward, because the sacrifice is just cooking meat. That's all it is, essentially. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood, I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal, I will require it. So if an animal kills a human, that animal has to die, is the implication. And from human beings, each one for the blood of another. I'll require a reckoning for human life. So God is raising the value of human life by putting the death penalty into place here. We'll have to talk about how this works and what you think about it in a moment. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image God made humankind. And you, this is back to Noah and his children, be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth, and multiply in it. So we'll stop there for a moment because there's plenty. I mean, what are your responses to reading that, Minister Joe?
It's an interesting perspective because for the main part, we do eat animals, and they seem to fear us to some degree. And on the same token, there aren't some animals I don't feel like fear us at all. You know what I'm saying? If I were to walk up to a lion in the wild, I'd be more afraid of that lion than it'd be of me, I think.
Yeah.
But I think that in principle, it is good to say that, or maybe not good to say, but it seems like the curse is falling to the animals.
Yeah, and
The
what I
property.
read this as saying is there's this animosity that we're no longer in good relationship. I think that's what he means by fear. So animals don't trust us anymore,
Mm,
and yet we have power over them. So that's how I see the fear. I don't see it as a lion would tuck tail and run, but I would say a lion won't trust you.
mm,
And we know that you can overcome that natural kind of state. Like I know in New Hampshire, we both lived there. It was a penalty to feed bears because when bears are fed by humans, they begin to lose their fear of humans, right? They begin to visit human populations more regularly. So
right.
you can overcome it, but there's still a basic instinct that an animal is going to distrust humans unless, like we domesticate animals, they come to trust us. We feed animals, they come to trust us. But you're overcoming something with that. That has to be bred out of them. So I think that's what we're talking about is the trust level. What do you make of the permission to eat meat?
Hmm. Well,
Do you
I
think it implies that they were not allowed to in the past?
I think what it's saying is that there's, and it could imply that, but I think it's it's the focus on the life being taken for life, the focus on where it mentions the actual blood, realizing that life is only sustainable by that means. Um,
I'm guessing that this must be rooted in behaviors that existed before the flood, that he is re-instructing Noah, or maybe for the first time instructing Noah as to what he expects. And I see what you're seeing, if this is what you're saying, that it's less permission to eat animals and more prohibition against eating humans. It almost says, I'll let you eat animals. But if a human is killed, whatever kills them must die. So there's a very clear prohibition against eating humans and a prohibition against eating raw meat, but an allowance to eat meat. I'm guessing because rules are generally not ideas, they're generally rooted in something already happening. I'm guessing that these behaviors existed before the flood, that somehow we're getting comments on the violence. We were not told what the violence was, but it seems that we're getting a little bit of a picture of what some of it might have been. And Noah might have been pretty innocent in terms of knowing all the things that those who didn't follow God did. And I doubt God would give him laws about those things, because why introduce ideas he doesn't need to have? But I'm guessing these were maybe things that had affected him, that he knew about. And God has given him instructions about it. And so I think they were eating meat before the flood, but I think they were doing it in ways very dishonoring to God. So he now gives Noah some more specific instructions. And it's very clear cannibalism is off the table.
they might have thought like maybe some traditions that believe that if you eat a certain type of animal that you gather their spirit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they played with that in that Noah movie I have mentioned several times that starred Russell Crowe. They played with the idea that Cain's descendants thought they could gain increased power by eating powerful animals. That certainly is a common belief. I mean, I know even in China, we still get word that they like to eat certain kinds of animals because they believe it imbues certain kinds of properties that are related to the animal if you were to eat it. And I'm sure that that's not just in Asia. I'm sure that there are those beliefs everywhere. I mean, I think it's in America too, honestly. I think there are people who eat certain things thinking that it's fortifying or something. And it might be spiritual for them. So maybe some of that was going on, but that would be hard to say.
Yeah, there's nothing really talking about it, but it would appear that you know, I mean, eating eating a person, obviously, if he explains that by the idea of the image of God.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you make? Maybe this is pushing you in a direction you want to go. But what do you make of the argument, which seems to me the argument, maybe I'm misreading it. Sounds to me like he's saying something that I heard Dennis Prager say once, that the value of life is determined by how you treat those who take it. There seems to be this sense that in order to make human life as sacred as God wants it to be, the death penalty has to be in place for those who murder. Now, we hear the opposite in our culture, right? We often say that killing someone for killing someone sends the wrong message. That if you do violence to someone who does violence, you're not actually being just. You're just doing the same thing. So many people are opposed to the death penalty today, and there are good reasons to be opposed to it, especially the brutality of some of how it has been done through history. Mm-hmm. But some people are opposed to it because they think that we need to prove that we value life more than the murderer by not doing to them what they did to their victim. There are people who've made that argument. The Bible seems, at least here, to make the opposite argument, that in order to value human life, you must execute those who take it, animals or humans. I mean, how do you process? I mean, maybe you think I'm reading it wrong and there's another way to read it, or how do you respond?
Yeah, I think he's that God is giving value to life there. That later on in the New Testament we say vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, that kind of thing. But certainly in the law there an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of mentality. So and further on it's more expounded and very very clear.
Yeah. God clearly believes in the death penalty, or else judgment and the second death make no sense.
Right.
So he clearly eventually believes in it.
Yeah. There's got to be some reckoning or accountability for a life being taken. That, for me, it's very serious and very serious. Every life matters to me. That's why I think that people who just sport and are brutal to things, to me that's not a means for life.
Well, I'll put myself on the chopping block, as I'm known to do.
There you go.
With this issue of the death penalty and whether or not, because I've heard some people say because of verses like this and the Torah later, that you have to believe in the death penalty if you're a follower of Jesus. So, and then I've had others say that it's so inconsistent with Jesus' teaching that we love our enemies, that we leave vengeance to God, that you can't possibly believe in the death penalty and follow Jesus. I've heard both of those arguments. So I might as well put myself on the chopping block. I have deep concerns with the death penalty as it has been practiced in human cultures for probably the same reasons a lot of people do. First of all, we sometimes get it wrong, and it's a terrible idea, in my view, to execute an innocent person.
Yeah.
So that can be nerve-wracking. Knowing that our justice is imperfect makes us hesitant to want to put the most extreme penalty on somebody. But that would have been true in their day as well. I'm sure their justice isn't going to be perfect either. And that doesn't stop God from making the claim. So, but I have worries about that. I also have worries about the way the death penalty has been enacted. Sometimes it just seems cruel and vicious. And yet the Old Testament requires stoning, which I would consider pretty barbaric. So that's, you wrestle around with that. So whether or not we are trustworthy enough to enact the death penalty is one question. And I'm willing, I have a lot of sympathy with people who say we are not qualified. We can't always get it right. We don't do it well. It's better to just not do it at all. Like, I totally get that. That actually is my nature a lot of the time. If I can't do something well, I don't want to do it at all. So I get that. But there's a deeper, more philosophical principle that's at stake in what God is saying here. And he seems to be indicating that the value of life is preserved by the punishments we lay on those who take it. And that does make sense to me. The other issue I have with the death penalty is it shortens the amount of time someone has to repent. Like I once said to my dad in a very heated exchange in a Sunday school class he was teaching, where I was a student and he was the teacher. And I said to him, if somebody broke into our house and they were in the middle of a crime, and let's just assume that that crime was born out of a heart that was not given to Jesus. If I shot them and killed them, I would be making an eternal condemnation on them. They have no chance to ever repent of what they did. Whereas I know I'm right with the Lord, which of the two of us is safer to die? And I remember I was very young. That sounds like something a young person would say, right? And I was in my teens. My dad, it was always good to listen and argue with me, even if it was in public. And so we went back and forth. I don't know what the rest of the class thought, but I made that argument with all sincerity. Now that I have my own children, I'm less apt to make that argument because I want to protect them. It's easy for an 18-year-old to make that argument. Or a single person for that matter, or somebody who doesn't have children to defend or to protect. But still, that bothers me too, that the shorter a period of time for someone to get their head on straight and repent, it bothers me. I kind of want to see them have as much time as possible. So all those things are struggles, but I still go back to this principle, and I think I have to believe that it actually raises the value of human life when we take the lives of those who steal it. I think I have to believe in that principle because I think it's a biblical one. I don't think it cheapens life when someone who premeditatedly murders another person is executed. I don't think that diminishes life's value. I think it increases it. And I know that that's not popular, but I think it does. But I still struggle with the death penalty practically for the reasons that I just explained.
It's certainly difficult. I mean, especially in our day. I mean, I've sat on a few juries too, and you wonder about all the truthfulness and the angles of defense lawyers and such, and the pleas and justice system. Yeah, obviously those are, and then like people have been in death row for lots and lots of years and been exonerated from DNA evidence.
That's
some of that stuff is very, very interesting, but it doesn't devalue life. The system may be imperfect, but I also believe pretty strongly that life is the sanctity of life, and so if a person murders someone, it's beyond reasonable doubt. I really do feel like that they're deserving of their life should be taken. Now I'm making a stand there, but that's every circumstance, every trial is going to be circumstantial. So
yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you in principle on that. Like I agree in principle. My anxiety and nervousness is over the inadequacy of human justice systems and the way in which we carry that out frequently. That stuff sort of bothers me. I am very American, I guess, and that doesn't mean that's Christian. I might be very non-Christian in what I'm about to say. I don't know. It's a blind spot for me. You can help me tell me if it's a blind spot. But I do carry, and I think there's a very American sentiment, this belief that I would rather, a whole mess of guilty people go free than one innocent person to perish. I do carry that basic assumption, and I like that we have the presumption of innocence in our country. Those are things that work very well with the way that I think. So that I do get afraid that innocent people will fall under this penalty. And maybe that's my primary worry about it. But I agree with you. I think when someone chooses to take another life, not by accident, which the Bible is full of, accidental deaths, unintentional murders, and things like that. There are other penalties. But when it's intentional, premeditated, rebellious assault that leads to death, I do think that a person forfeits their own life, and that does secure the value of human life. And I think that people who are like me, so afraid of getting it wrong that we can't stand for that principle, I think we run the risk of creating a very unjust society. I think. But I do want to see people have time to repent. I really do.
And there's been like James Dobson interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer, and that's a video. I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying that they're typically people.
I didn't know that James Dobson interviewed him.
I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
Yeah. No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I've seen interviews with Dahmer. I just didn't know any religious people had interviewed him.
Yeah, I think there's part of us too, even the most heinous of criminals, desire to have some type of reconciliation. There's usually a greater story, and that doesn't help us much. That brings you to those kinds of things. I've heard stories about Lee Harvey Oswald too, and the kind of marriage he had, and some of that stuff. That there's always more to the story, is what I'm trying to say.
And the more you realize that, the more inadequate I think the more inadequate human wisdom seems to really adjudicate properly the situations we're facing. And in the best possible case, I think people who are against the death penalty are against it. There are some people who are against just ending human life in principle, even if no matter what a person has done. I don't stand with them. But I think there are a great many people who stand against the death penalty because of this recognition, this humility, this realization that there's always more to the story, that there's always more details we don't have, that we are hardly ever in the position to properly adjudicate the situation. And because of that, I think many feel that we should err on the side of not ending somebody's life and finding some other way for them to continue it that hedges our bets against them doing it again. I think there are a great many people that fall on that, and I think it comes from a pretty good place, a recognition that we are incomplete in our knowledge and that there's always more to it. But again, it creates another host of problems to live that way.
Yep.
Because is life in prison in some situations preferable?
Right.
Or is it even worse? Yeah, I remember I watched, sadly, this might even be, this is in Harry Potter. So I know it's a story about witches and witchcraft fantasy stuff, but for those of our people who have read those or watched the movies, there's a very interesting exchange that might speak to this. And Voldemort is the main evil character who's pretty much driven, spoiler alert, by a desire to live forever. He's terrified of dying. And one of the things that one of the better characters, Dumbledore, says to Harry is Voldemort fails to realize that there are things worse than dying. Mm-hmm. And it's a very wise thing to say, because there are some people who soothe their consciences with the idea that as long as we're not killing anybody, they're better off. But that has led to some pretty atrocious situations for a great many people. Sometimes we fail to realize that if we are going to keep people alive, we owe them a certain kind of life. And so for those of us who might be against the death penalty because we think in the wake of Jesus, we realize that only God is really authorized to make these decisions, and so we need to not execute. We have to realize that what comes with that is the responsibility to care, to somehow make sure that life is not torturous, because torturing people for the whole remainder of their lives is not mercy.
Right.
So we owe people a certain, I'm always very happy to hear that there are Christians in the prison system who bring their Christian values to that place. Mm-hmm. I know we have some in our church who have worked and do work in that system. And I'm so glad to know there are Christians there, because we haven't necessarily created a better situation.
Well, certainly there's the idea of redemption, and that, and those who have committed crimes, whether or not we believe that they can be reconciled with God after what they've done. So some people have a deeper appreciation for that than other people.
Yeah, and it depends on really who it's done to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the closer you are to it, the more you're going to want to see justice done.
Yeah.
And some cultures realize justice does have to be done, or else the wounds never really heal.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a lot of interesting fictional books and movies written about that. We're not going to cover it, and I'm sure we've offended everybody in one way or another, whether you're for or against the death penalty. But what I do want to insist is the scriptures do teach that one of the ways God sought to make human life more sacred, more valuable, is by creating a penalty for all those who would choose to take human life, even animals. And we do this. I mean, people will kill lions who become man-eaters and things like that, right? The example later on in the Torah will be bulls that gore people.
Yeah.
Things like that. I mean, what's the point of having these conversations, Minister Joe, if we're not going to start hacking at the tall weeds?
Yeah.
So here we are in verse 8. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him. So they're the only existing humans on earth. It's important to remember that. Mm-hmm. So the implication is this covenant is made with everybody. So this is not an exclusive covenant. As for me, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. And never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that's with you for all future generations. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I'll remember my covenant that's between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I've established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Responses.
Yeah. Well, God is making the promise not to destroy everything with water again, and most of the time though, before a storm hits, though, I don't see a rainbow. I usually see it kind of after it's rained.
Yeah.
After it's rained, but
now what's important is that it doesn't say rainbow. I always like pointing out what's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's his bow. He's going to put his bow in the clouds. Now we assume this is the rainbow. Mm-hmm. And I think we're probably right to make that assumption. But the word is the word keshet or keshet. Keshet. And it's a hunting bow.
Mm.
So this is like God putting his sword on the wall, his bow in the sky. It's a reminder not to kill us. And you notice the text is consistent with that. I often like to joke around with people to see if they really pay attention to the language. But who is the bow a sign for? It's not a sign for people. It's a sign for God to remember. Because it's not a human covenant. People don't need to be reminded of this covenant because they didn't make it. Mm-hmm. This is God's covenant. Now, there'll have to be a reminder of the covenant of Sinai because people agree to it. But nobody agrees to this covenant. This is one-sided. God doesn't ask for anything in return. He makes this covenant unilaterally. and he puts the bow in the sky as a sign to him. So Jen and I joke around whenever we see a rainbow that we wonder why God needed to be reminded not to kill us today.
Right. A little more rain, a little more.
And it's interesting. I mean, it's
Right.
obviously spoken to our perspective because rainbows are actually full circles, right? And in certain places you could see the whole thing. But because the horizon gets in the way, the planet does, we only ever see half of it.
Mm-hmm.
But you could get into the science of it, but this isn't about science.
Yeah, right.
You could also get into the argument of whether there ever was a rainbow before this. And people have, like acting as though, well, this must have been the first rainbow they ever saw. It doesn't have to be that. God can give new meaning to things that have been there before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that they had seen it before. But he's giving it new meaning.
Mm-hmm.
He's indicating that he will see it. And you're right. It doesn't always come after the storm. Science will tell you when you'll see it.
Yeah. It's usually when the sun's shining.
When the sun is on to your back,
mm-hmm.
shining through falling rain,
Mm-hmm.
or there's at least an atmosphere that has enough moisture in it, you will see a rainbow if you're at the right angle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But that's not what this is about. It's about God placing a sign to remind himself never to bring the flood again. And you can get into the theology. Why does God need to be reminded? Doesn't he know everything? This is spoken in a way you can understand. The simple point is nothing has changed. Yeah. The same thing that brought God to destroy the earth in the first place is still here. So the only reason not to destroy it is because he said he wouldn't. And the rainbow is a reminder not only of God's promise, but of our depravity. It's a reminder that we still deserve to be destroyed. But it's by his grace we are not. So it's a very complicated sign. I think when people tell me they love rainbows, that they're looking at it like a secular humanist. Because they're beautiful. And they also reveal some things about the nature of light. Very, very instructive little bit of God's handiwork. But if you really know the scriptures, you should not love rainbows. You should be thankful for the rainbow. But you shouldn't love it because it reveals that it's only God's promise that's keeping us alive, not our own merit. And that is I'm glad of it. But boy, do I wish. Maybe I'm an idiot. But I wish he didn't need to be constantly reminded. I see too many rainbows, if you ask me.
It harkens back to the words of inclination of humanity.
Yeah. This has been such a thing for us in our house that we prefer to see rainbows that are not over our house. So sometimes the kids will see a rainbow. I go, which direction is it?
Right over the pool, Daddy. It's right over the pool.
It's over the pool.
I wonder where that pump doesn't work.
What did I do?
The pump must be spraying water.
Yeah. So but his promise here is so significant that he'll never destroy all life again. Now, we of course know enough as we read through the rest of Scripture that that's not to say God won't bring judgment on the earth. He does it with Sodom and Gomorrah. He does it with Egypt. He does it on Israel through Assyria and through Babylon. He does it on Babylon through the Medes and the Persians. I mean, God brings judgment on the people. Joel talks about a locust plague that devastated Israel because of their wickedness. Mm-hmm. So it's not as though this is not God saying, I'm never going to judge humanity again. It's just he's promising never to do this cosmic judgment where he pretty much wipes out everything. Like he's promised not to do that. But it's not a promise he's not going to judge us. That would be overreading it. So just so everybody knows, Minister Joe told me to lead this conversation today, and he would interject as he felt the need. So if you think I'm dominating things, I'm actually trying to be a really good host. But Minister Joe, you feed in however you would like.
Yeah, well, it's.
Can you affirm? Can you affirm you told me that, Minister Joe?
I did, yes. I've had a rough weekend, and I had the training wheels on today to actually function. So, thank you for letting me coast a little.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't have to just be this passage here just to see that what God has done for us, to be able to given us so many chances to find forgiveness, find redemption, and in the sense that, I mean, if he did wipe out the whole earth for everything, every wrong decision and bad thing that I've done, then that wouldn't be quite fair to other people as well. So I think this is defining. I mean, it's also saying too that, you know, the consequences of the garden, again, don't have to be as destructive to all of creation, even though in Romans it talks about all of creation groans for salvation.
Yeah.
The sons of men. The ramifications of the judgment, which is curious, probably to look at it from other places like Revelation and such.
Yeah, these images will carry over. That's why we spent so much time in these first 11 chapters, because they carry over forever. Even in the throne room of God, there is a sea in the middle of it. And that sea is banished from the new heavens and the new earth. There is no more of this sea. But these gathered waters in the throne room of God carry with them this great significance, that God is holding the waters and he's not pouring them out. And oftentimes when we do talk about God's wrath, it'll be the cup of his wrath, right, that Jesus drinks. Just this idea that there's this great basin in the throne room of God that's full of these waters that could destroy everything if God let them go. And he keeps them. Those waters will not exist in the new heavens and the new earth. The threat of that is gone, which is a wonderful, blessed hope in Revelation 21. But they are here as long as we are. And the rainbow continues to remind us of God. It does remind us of God's promise, but it's really placed in the sky as a reminder to him. He puts his weapon in the sky. And if you've ever seen a full rainbow, it's a huge bow.
Yeah. I have a picture of a double rainbow in Fairmount.
Ooh, there was some sin under that one.
Oh, yeah.
You see that double rainbow, you run.
Right over Target. What's going on there, huh?
Oh, boy.
The double meaning there at Target.
He needed 2 reminders on that one.
Yeah. It's even more interesting when people don't see it. I said, do you see a double rainbow? And the people are like, what do you mean? I only see one.
It's all about your angle, right? Science can tell us some of why we can see and can't see. But what science can't tell us is when God sees a rainbow. Because we may not be able to see all the rainbows he can see.
What is God thinking when he's got to have 2 rainbows?
That's what I say. If you see 2 rainbows, man, fall on your knees and repent in sackcloth and ashes. But this covenant that he makes is with all of humanity. And the Jewish people long remember that God did not only make a covenant with Israel, but he's also made one with all creation. And the first one is with Noah, and that comes back in Acts, in our reading in Acts chapter 15. The requirements they lay on Gentiles when they come to faith are derived from this covenant with Noah. So don't eat animals that are strangulated or have their blood still in them. Avoid sexual immorality. The Jewish people have often connected the violence of the pre-flood world with sexual immorality. Mm-hmm. They've often done that. So that comes up too. And so anyway, this is going to have effects. Sometimes this is known as the covenant with the Gentiles, but it's a covenant with all earth.